All right, welcome to this explainer. We're skipping the usual intro stuff today because, honestly, the story we're unpacking is just too fascinating to wait. We're talking about one of the most iconic voices in human history, Celine Dion. But specifically, we're looking at this wild juxtaposition in her life around 1998, a year when she was quite literally on top of the world. To truly understand the heights of her success, though, we have to look at exactly where she came from. And trust me, the contrast is going to blow your mind.
So, I want you to picture the number 90. It's a pretty big number, right? But this isn't how many shows she played that year, or how many awards she swept up. 90 was literally the size of the touring crew traveling with Celine at the absolute peak of her career in 1998. Think about that for a second. You're basically moving a small village, 90 people, from city to city, country to country, just to put on your show. The sheer scale of the machine behind her was just unbelievable.
And here's where it gets crazy, because the contrast of her reality is absolutely stark. On one hand, you've got this global icon living out of luxury penthouses, surviving on room service, with an army of 90 people at her beck and call. But if we rewind, her origins are completely different. She was the youngest of 14, yes, 14 children. She grew up in a home so packed that she was sleeping 3, sometimes 4 kids to a single bed. From sharing a mattress with your siblings to commanding a 90-person entourage, how does someone even begin to bridge that kind of gap?
Well, to really grasp it, we need to look at just how massive 1998 was for her. It was a year of extreme highs. She's up in Toronto doing charity concerts that raised over $1 million for cystic fibrosis. Then she's flying off to Italy, singing with the legendary Luciano Pavarotti for a crowd of 100,000 people under a full moon. Oh, and right, she was also riding the absolute unsinkable tidal wave of the Titanic theme, My Heart Will Go On. The glamour and the sheer scale of her life were literally off the charts. But here is the craziest part about 1998. It was actually supposed to be her year off. Yeah, she had just wrapped up this massive tour for Because You Loved Me, and her plan was to just go home, have picnics, maybe do some decorating. But the gravitational pull of that Titanic soundtrack pulled her right back in. She even said herself that people were going so crazy for the Titanic song, she literally had no choice but to hit the road again with her massive in-the-round stage setup and that 90-person crew. The momentum was just way too huge to stop.
Okay, but let's pull the rug out from under those massive 1998 stadium lights for a second. We're flashing all the way back to a humble, super crowded, really old house in Quebec. The reality of being the youngest of 14 kids. This right here, this early life struggle, is the foundation that entirely shaped the superstar she became.
And Celine's own memories of this time paint such a vivid picture. She remembers the house being so old and the ceilings being so low that even as a little girl, she could literally reach up and touch them. She's talked about how they never ever had anything new. Everything was warm, full of love, but definitively old. And there's that detail again, sleeping 3 or 4 people in the exact same bed just to physically make room for everyone. You have to imagine the daily struggle her parents faced just to keep this place functioning for 14 growing kids. The house was constantly falling apart. Her father, who was incredibly handy, was basically repairing things every 2 days just to keep a roof over their heads. Think about the manual labor and the sheer exhaustion of holding an old house together with tape and glue where nothing is ever brand new. That was her totally normal, everyday life. So how exactly does a global superstar emerge from a cramped, falling apart house? Well, it literally started in the foundation. She remembers being tiny and actually feeling the vibrations coming up through the floorboards from the basement where her older brothers and sisters were rehearsing for weekend shows. By age 5, she grabs a microphone and gives her very first performance at her brother's wedding. And the second she heard that applause, right then and there at 5 years old, she realized, okay, this is my life. That crowded house actually gave her her very first audience.
And what's so fascinating is how this upbringing completely changed the way she views her massive audiences today. Since she was the baby of 14, her older siblings essentially acted like extra parents. She remembers her sisters practically fighting over who got to bathe her and dress her. She was just showered with constant attention. So because she grew up singing for 20 family members crammed in a kitchen, performing for millions today doesn't actually feel foreign to her. When she looks out at a massive stadium crowd, she feels like they're just her brothers and sisters, and she's right back in our childhood living room.
But that brings us to a really interesting question. The living room mentality is great, sure, but the Grammys and the Olympics? That's a whole different beast. How does a global superstar actually handle the grueling physical reality of that intense fame and pressure? Well, it creates this incredible duality.
What you and I see on TV is a calm, confident superstar belting out 5-octave notes without even breaking a sweat. But her reality? Profound internal nerves. She's admitted that while she might look completely comfortable, her stomach is working in overdrive. She internalizes a massive amount of stress and anxiety. In fact, she even attributes her skinny frame to the sheer amount of adrenaline and pressure her body has to process just to get through her performances.
She actually describes her pre-show feeling as being like an animal trapped in a cage. Before she steps on stage, she hears the roar of the crowd, she feels the anxiety, she struggles to trust herself, and the nerves are just terrible. But the exact second that cage opens, the moment they announce her name and she steps into the spotlight, the performer inside her just completely takes over. She has almost no control over it. The fear completely vanishes into pure adrenaline.
It's really interesting to compare her approach to one of her absolute biggest idols, Barbra Streisand. Streisand is famous for having debilitating stage fright. The anticipation causes her such intense stress that her immune system actually shuts down and she gets physically sick, which is exactly why she avoids touring. Celine, on the other hand, internalizes that exact same heavy pressure, but her response is completely different. She forces herself through the fear. She lets the adrenaline take over, and she delivers for her fans night after night, after night, after night.
But look, pushing through that kind of anxiety requires some extreme recovery. When she finally gets a rare day off, she goes into total shutdown mode. We're talking absolute silence. She will remain completely mute just to let her vocal cords rest. Her diet, pure comfort food. Bagels loaded with butter, massive bags of potato chips, taking hot baths, and just zoning out watching TV. It is a strict, non-negotiable regimen of doing absolutely nothing just so she can survive the grueling tour schedule.
Which kind of leads us to flip the whole concept of fame upside down for a second. I really want you to think about this. When you are a global superstar, isolated in top-tier luxury hotels with a 90-person crew and literally the world at your fingertips, what do you actually dream about? What do you crave the most?
The answer is honestly so grounding. It's the simple joy of a warm piece of toast. I mean it. While everyday people might dream of a life of endless room service and never having to cook a meal again, Celine desperately misses normalcy. She points out that room service toast is always cold and rock hard by the time it actually makes it up to your room. She just wants to be standing in her own kitchen, making her own warm breakfast.
And her passions outside of music are surprisingly mundane. She absolutely loves decorating spaces. She daydreams about going over to a friend's house just to clean paint and do their dishes. She actually wants to rearrange people's furniture. She constantly longs for the time to just be a normal person and do the everyday housework that the rest of us entirely take for granted and, let's be honest, usually complain about.
But all of this incredible hard work, all the terrible anxiety, the endless touring, the absolute vocal silence, it all culminated in one incredibly emotional milestone for her. And it brings us right back to where we started, because the ultimate goal wasn't actually the fame itself. It was buying her parents a brand new home. And the pure joy in her words when she talks about this just says it all. After growing up in a house that was literally constantly falling apart, her biggest thrill in life was giving her parents a home where everything was totally brand new. A new bed, a new sofa, a pristine new kitchen. But most importantly, she couldn't believe her dad didn't have to repair things every 2 days anymore. She had finally freed him from a lifetime of endless manual labor. So, this really brings us to the core message we've been unpacking today in this explainer. The incredible, relentless work ethic of Celine Dion was born directly out of a crowded, falling-apart house. That intense early life struggle is exactly what pushed her to the very top of the global music world. But the irony is just palpable, right? The more famous she became, the more she found herself missing the exact same ordinary life she worked so incredibly hard to elevate her family away from.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Isn't it absolutely fascinating that the ultimate reward for reaching the literal pinnacle of global fame, for having millions of adoring fans and a 90-person tour crew, is a desperate craving for the simple, everyday life that the rest of us are so often trying to escape? Just something to think about the next time you're standing at the sink doing the dishes. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the truly incredible journey of Celine Dion.